Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here today. Um, my name is Emma Clark. Oopsies. I am the Education Issue Area Coordinator through the Haas Center for Public Service at Stanford. The Issue Area program is a new program this year at the Haas Center, and our goal is to foster collaboration and learning among student groups, faculty, and community partners through the areas of education, environmental sustainability, and health. So this year I've been tasked with putting on learning events and collaboration events for the education community at Stanford and beyond. So I'm so happy to put on this learning event this year with Juanita. Juanita grew up in Belle Haven and spent the majority of her educational career in East Palo Alto, and now works at Street Code in the tech industry. And she has a really unique perspective on the inner workings of the educational community in East Palo Alto, both historically and today. So I feel really lucky to have the chance to get to hear from her today. And so we'll start by just having Juanita present, and then at the end we'll have time for some question and answer and discussion. So thank you all for being here today, and I'll turn it over to Juanita to introduce herself more and present.
Okay, thank you, Emma. I really appreciate your support. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to share what I consider to be a unique perspective on the history of East Palo Alto as someone who has lived in the area for over 60 years and been a part of the same school district and have been involved with nonprofits and other groups in East Palo Alto. So today I'm going to start off with just a little bit of history going back quite a ways, and then give you a little bit more of my story afterwards, after you have the history kind of perspective as well. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen to start. Okay. I'm going to talk about East Palo Alto from the perspective of the school districts, because actually the school districts have a longer history than East Palo Alto does. And it's within that framework that I view my time in the area as being a part of East Palo Alto, even though I have always pretty much lived in Belle Haven. And so I'll explain that relationship a little bit and then talk about the challenges that both the East Palo Alto, when it was unincorporated as well as a city, and then the neighborhood of Belle Haven in the city of Menlo Park, because we're kind of tied together in terms of the school districts. And so the school districts include the Ravenswood City School District, which many of you know about based on your responses. Many of you are volunteering in there. You belong to partner organizations and nonprofits, and there were a few community members there. And so starting off, the Ravenswood City School District is a big part of this educational history with East Palo Alto and Belle Haven. Sequoia is the high school district that we go to. So Ravenswood is one of many feeders into the Sequoia Union High School District. And it's there that we have some challenges in the elementary school district, but we have more challenges actually at the high school level. So I'm going to just go over a brief history of both in terms from a somewhat personal perspective. So I've been doing research with a friend of mine, looking back at the history. And right now, African Americans are concerned about losing our history in East Palo Alto and in Belle Haven. And so part of this is part of the research that we've been doing, and I did want to share some of this history out because I don't know if you've heard about this history, okay? The Ravenswood City School District was established back in 82. Okay, so before the turn of the 20th century. And the boundary originally extended as far back as Middlefield Road, and went all the way out to the bay. Okay, and the only city in the area at the time was Redwood City, which became a county seat. And the Menlo Park School District was established just 2 years prior to the Ravenswood City School District. So those two school districts have now had, more than a century of relationships over time. And they were both formed out of the Redwood City School District, which did exist prior to that. Okay? The map that you're looking at shows both the Ravenswood City School District in 1910 and as well in 2010. And so you'll see, it'll be kind of hard to tell, but the area, this map actually shows you the borders that used to be part of the school district back as far back as 1910. Okay. So I talk about, the reason why I wanted to talk about the school district is that the effect of segregation, redlining, and all of that affected both communities at the same time. The redlining was set up as early as, redlining became a practice in 1937. There were developers and groups that started planning. The city of Menlo Park was part of that, planning out exactly how they were going to set up redlining in the area, especially as the freeway was coming in, okay, which created a natural barrier to the two communities. The Ravenswood City School District now is made up of these two areas here. And so I like to refer to them as my Nairobi village, because they represent for me a single entity. It's just that East Palo Alto is now a city and a county, and Belle Haven is a neighborhood in the adjacent city. But they both are still suffering from the effects of segregation and the, I'll call it bias that people have about people of color, okay? So just to talk a little bit about the Ravenswood City School District, I attended Belle Haven. My family moved here in the mid-50s. Belle Haven was already here, and I entered the school as a second grader. Most of the students were white. There was a majority of white, and Blacks were just starting to move in 55. My parents, who were very much interested in integration, did participate in school activities such as the PTA. And I know my mother used to come to the school often and bring things like cupcakes and stuff in the classroom as I grew up. So I have mostly fond memories of Belle Haven, but over the years, the racial difference became more dramatic over time. Some of the other schools that I attended in the Ravenswood City School District included O'Connor, which for me was my only busing experience, fortunately, to get there. Green Oaks Middle School, where I was able to walk to school, but students were assigned to tracks based on their literacy and math level skills. And one issue with that is that students were sometimes passed on to the next grade without any real attempt made at helping them with their literacy problems. The one dramatic experience I had or remember from my growing up is the physical abuse of a white male teacher in Green Oaks. And it's something that has stuck with me, but it was, back then it was actually common practice. I did graduate with my friends. Half of us went to Menlo Atherton, and the other half was assigned to Ravenswood. And Menlo Park, the Belhaven area, was the first to be affected by the integration that came about. So we moved on to the Sequoia Union High School District, and it was founded in 1895. So just a few years after the Ravenswood City School District and the Menlo Park. It was considered to be a prep school for Stanford at that time. And it currently includes the cities between East Palo Alto to the south. We're right here in the map, all the way up to San Carlos, which is about a 15-mile drive up there. So Ravenswood High School is part of the Sequoia, was part of the Sequoia Union High School District, and it was built as a segregated high school. It was built in 1958. And the school district knew when they were building the school that it was illegal to have a segregated high school, but they were committed to the plans. And so they went ahead with it, assuming that they could come up with some deviation. History has shown that that didn't work out, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but the school did close in 1976 after 18 years of trying to figure out ways to integrate the school, with the main problem being segregated housing as the issue. But I will say about Ravenswood is that we have a proud alumni. The school may be closed, but Ravenswood still lives on. And the alumni host annual events every year. We have actually 2 or 3. They're active on Facebook. We even have a nonprofit that provides scholarships for youth in East Palo Alto and Belle Haven. So we continue to participate in activities, even though many people have moved away, they still come back for events and activities here in East Palo Alto, especially to celebrate survival, I think, sometimes, because we love being together. And so it's one of the things that's lingering about East Palo Alto, the pride. This document shares with you the enrollment statistics, which shows the total enrollment versus the Black enrollment for all of the years that the school was open. So it did start in 58 with 21% Black enrollment. At its peak in, it looks like 1969 to 1971, it was up to 94%. And then even when it closed, it was still at 65%. And so this was after many attempts at trying to integrate Ravenswood School. Some experiences that I can talk about is my family, because in terms of the school districts we all attended, my younger sisters, who were just a few years younger than me, were moved from Ravenswood High School to Menlo Atherton for their last couple of years of high school. And it was around that time that we experienced sit-ins and riots in both Menlo Atherton and at Ravenswood. My younger sister, who was actually born after we arrived in Menlo Park, ended up at Woodside High School, but was later able to transfer to Menlo Atherton. My children and niece attended Menlo Atherton after attending private schools and after-school programs through their K through 8 years. But they all graduated from Menlo Atherton. Okay. So I was the only one who had the opportunity to graduate from Ravenswood in my family. I did want to talk a little bit about my daughter's experience at Menlo Atherton, which occurred between 94 and 98. And this has to do with bias. My daughter entered Menlo Atherton as with an outstanding academic record and teacher recommendation from a private school. She and her teachers assumed that she would be placed in the AS/AP track at the school. Okay. When she was placed in regular classes instead, I encouraged her to first advocate on her own behalf. And then if she wasn't able to get results, then I would actually go up and take action myself. Okay. But their decision was that before she could be moved to ASAP classes, that they insisted that she get all A's in her regular classes in her first trimester. So she did. And so she was able to get into the ASAP track. But throughout the whole time she was in that track, she encountered a lot of bias, a lot of in some ways, they didn't include her in things. For example, one of the teachers was hosting a special class for the AS English class, and they hadn't invited her to join. And again, when she went back to advocate for herself, they told her that they really didn't think that young Black students would be interested in having an additional class to support their studies. Okay, so she insisted, and they did allow her to participate. But she encountered a lot of little indignities like that throughout her 4 years participating in those classes. And one of the things she found was that white students who had come from the white schools districts were automatically placed in those classes, even if they weren't academically as capable. And so that is the type of discrimination that a lot of students out of our area, out of the Ravenswood City School District, encountered when they got into the public schools, the public high schools, was that even if they were academically able, they weren't included by default. In terms of post-secondary experiences with education, my children and my niece were able to go on and get their college degrees, and all of them are working successfully working in primarily the things that they do. So my niece was able to become a guidance counselor at an East Bay Community College after transferring from Foothill to UCLA to San Francisco State. My daughter went from UCLA to Cal State Northridge, and she teaches Spanish in private schools. My son, who went through Foothill, transferred to San Francisco State, chose to drive Samtram buses, but works independently on film and video production, which is his passion. And so my children were successful in getting through school in spite of the challenges that they had, to move on to good careers and the things that they wanted to do. Now, my experience also included Nairobi College. And Nairobi College was an independent Black school here in East Palo Alto. It opens its doors in September of 1969. Unfortunately, it closed its doors in 1978, but it had a significant impact on my Nairobi village, okay, the foundation of it. Mainly, it was focused on the Black community, but it had a third world perspective. And so Nairobi College was very much into alliances with other minority groups of color. Okay. They applied what they called the Nairobi Method to education. And it made a big difference for people in the community in terms of becoming more literate and becoming more political. Credits from Nairobi were accepted at local universities and colleges. So many of us were able to use our credits from the classes that we took at Nairobi. A few people even took classes at Stanford during that period of time. And so we were able to earn our credits. So I did want to share with you the Nairobi Method, because for those of us in the community, it made a big difference in terms of the how we view education. Okay, and I took this from an article that was written by Mary Hoover, Dr. Mary Hoover, who is basically the author or the creator of this method with the help of others. So the main thing with the Nairobi Method, and it's still used to some extent in the community and in a few other places that know about it. The main thing is a difference of perspective about the people who live in East Palo Alto, especially those people of color who came from families where education was denied or diminished. And so the main thing was that they wanted everyone to have a positive attitude and high expectations of everyone that walked through the door, no matter what their educational level was. Okay. It developed out of the workshops that were created for the volunteers, who were primarily European Americans. So similar to what we see today with street code and many of you who are here, there were white students who wanted to work with Nairobi College, but they wanted to make sure that they got some training first in terms of how they would interact with African Americans, so that any biases that they may have were spoken about and talked about, and they were given alternative ways of viewing those biases. It was part of workshops that included 3 on materials and 3 on attitude, and so that was part of it. It was also skills-oriented instruction, and the belief was that students could develop more through the teachings of academic skills and political education in a supportive environment. And so, for example, the use of African American culture, history, language, and politics in the curriculum were the framework under which all of the learning occurred. Students and teachers celebrated Black History Month. We looked at and engaged in things that involve music, rhymes, raps, storytelling, all of those kinds of things to bring learning to members of the community. Another part of it was the holistic approach based on African American learning styles. And this was specifically primarily applied to reading. Mary Hoover had written, she and Marcia Fabian had written a book called Patterns for Reading. And we used it to teach reading to almost every level. It was used to teach it in the summer teen program for preschoolers. It was used to teach the middle schoolers. It was used to teach the adults. And so that gave people a different way of learning reading, using patterns rather than just sounding out letters. It also included teaching in group activities using the participatory games and activities to learn skills, sort of making it fun to learn. the next part is developing youth with a caring commitment to the community. And this piece was huge for us because the goal was to train leaders who would return to the communities because many of our youth, once they got their education and went off to college, we never saw them again. So we had, for a long time, East Palo Alto and Belle Haven had issues around the fact that we couldn't get our youth to come back once they left. The Summer Team Project, which I actually participated in my first year as a student at Nairobi, we were taught the reading method, and then we trained middle schoolers to teach preschoolers how to read. And it was first offered by the day schools that came up first, and then by Nairobi College, which came up afterwards. It was a fantastic program. It was exciting to watch middle schoolers actually get interested in learning and teaching others, because they really got excited about being a leader in their community. And so the materials about the Nairobi Method I found in this particular article, which is part of the Journal of Negro Education. And it was significant for me in terms of what I ultimately wanted to do. So before I sort of start my history, okay, good, we're pretty good time. Are there any questions right off the bat based on what I've shown so far?
Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can send it in the chat as well.
I have a question. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why the Nairobi school closed. I'm not sure if you're gonna talk about that later in your history, but I think that would be interesting to know more about.
Well, the reason why Nairobi, the schools closed is basically the same reason that very little success happens in the Black community. There is no investment. The school was doing great work. The college was renowned around the country and across the world. But in terms of things like having donors or having an endowment or something like that, as a institution, you need that kind of investment to continue on with the school, because the Nairobi did have its accreditation, but we, at the time, we were fighting for our civil rights. And so the white community was not too happy with what was going on at that time. So getting an endowment or anything like that from funders or donors in this area was always the challenge. And that actually is the challenge even with the Ravenswood City School District. Because once they created this segregated educational system, every attempt, there were different suits that were filed against, especially the Sequoia Union High School District and also the Ravenswood City School District, to figure out ways to improve Ravenswood so that the kids wouldn't have to be bused. So the kids wouldn't have to, like the Tinsley Act came up and they had to be, kids are bused to, I think there's 18 schools or something like that. And it's mainly because we couldn't get a commitment from the other side to invest in Ravenswood City School District. So the only alternative that the people who were trying to desegregate and so forth could do was to send all of the Black kids out to all the white schools. And there's just a lack of investment, period, in the communities. The same way with Menlo Park, because Menlo Park, again, also didn't invest in the Belhaven community. Does that kind of give you?
Thank you
answer
so
your
much.
question, Betsy? Oh, sure.
Yes.
Okay.
We have a question in the chat. So can you talk a bit more about the segregation in both education and housing? Wasn't it an explicit mandate from the government? What was their justification?
Okay. The justification was Jim Crow. So Jim Crow were a set of laws and rules that were developed over time from the time of 1865, when African Americans were given the right, were released from slavery. And so right after that happened, and they were also given the right to vote, I think it's the 13th Amendment. You have to excuse me because I didn't put this down. As soon as they gained the right to vote, the KKK was formed and Jim Crow laws were put into place, just like what we're seeing right now with the Republican Party. Exactly the same thing, okay? So you're seeing it live happening right now. So that's what they did. So Jim Crow laws basically included things like that in the South, it was Black people had separate doors, had to go around the back to enter buildings, couldn't drink out of the same fountain, couldn't go to, couldn't ride on the bus, had to sit in the back of the bus. So all of those things that you hear about were all part of the Jim Crow. Now the redlining, which came about later, was a federal mandate. The federal government actually created the redlining and supported it. And they encouraged banks as well as developers to set up a situation where they would move out a group of white people to move all the Black people in. They would force the white people to sell at a low rate because they were afraid to live with Black people, so they would rush out. And then they would sell to the Black people at a higher rate and also charge higher interest rates, all of that for them to move into that same house. And so they pushed all of the Black people into the same area. We could not buy in Palo Alto, we couldn't buy in Menlo Park. On the other side, we couldn't buy in many areas of San Mateo County and Santa Clara County. Any attempts to buy, you couldn't get a loan. You couldn't, and the houses had what was called racially restrictive covenants. And at the bottom of the deed, way at the bottom, it says that the property owner did not have the right to sell that house to an African American or Black Negroes, they called it Negroes, Jews, Chinese, all of that. So those restrictive covenants existed until 1968, when I was a grown adult. That was when the laws changed in 1968. And when that happened, a lot of Black people left the area because they finally could. And that was when we also saw the sort of the transition from African Americans to Mexicans and Latin Americans moving in because Black people could finally go. So that was really part of it, was the Jim Crow laws, and it affected jobs, housing, education, and voting, because they essentially kept us away from being able to vote. Yeah.
Awesome. And then one last question before you continue.
Okay.
Jana asks, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about why African-American students are not involved or engaged in various programs to support them academically and personally.
Okay, there's a lot in that. Part of the issue is, think about it in terms of what we see now with vaccine hesitancy, okay? We see now in vaccine hesitancy that, they talked about the fact that African Americans have had a lot of trauma due to the health systems. And so as a result, they are hesitant to take advantage of even the things that are there to help them. The same is true of education, that many of the people, especially the people I grew up with, they had a bad experience in the school districts. Their children had a bad experience in the school district. Their grandchildren are having problems with the school district. And many of them now are at the next level of great grandchildren. So if they're still living here and their family has been here since the 50s, which a lot of families are still here, they don't trust the school system because the school system hasn't provided the kind of support to help them with their education because they're starting off with a deficit already. So, and the other thing, and I'll mention this. So for several years after I retired, I decided I would go out and help families go to teacher conferences. And so I would actually go with mostly grandmothers to these conferences to talk to the teachers at the school. And I wasn't surprised that because I was there as an educator with that parent, that the conversation was totally different from what the parent usually got when they went by themselves. Because they were made to, the teachers would talk down to them. They would talk over their heads. They weren't welcoming. It was like, it was an issue all the time. And so parents stopped going to the parent-teacher conferences because they don't want to be insulted by the teachers and stuff. So it's usually things like that that keep both the grandparents, the parents, the children, the grandchildren, all of them from wanting to participate.
Great. Thanks, Juanita.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's
Okay.
all the questions we have.
Okay, all right. So now I'll talk a little bit about my history and how I sort of, oops. Oh, yeah, here I go. So you get to know a little bit more about me. And this will be a great way to finish. So currently, I have the honor of being the senior lead teacher of tech exposure. It's a foundational tech class at Street Code, as well as serving on the Street Code tech support team, providing tech support to families and teachers in the Ravenswood City School District. I come to this work with 50 years of teaching experience and 40 years of supporting and teaching tech in educational institutions and the community. If you were to look at my LinkedIn page, you'd see that my focus is on educational technology, which mainly looks at the hardware, software, networking, and even the classroom environment as it pertains to teaching. You'll also see that my only credential is a State of California Lifetime Community College teaching credential in computers and related technologies. So even though I did go to UC Berkeley for a year, that didn't work out for me. So I chose alternative methods to get into education. As you can tell, I often say I grew up in Belle Haven, which is where I live, but came of age in East Palo Alto. When my family moved here during the Black migration out of San Francisco, because many families came out of the projects all at the same time, coming into the my Nairobi village, we were still living under the Jim Crow laws. East Palo Alto and Belhaven were segregated red line communities. When it was time to graduate from Ravenswood, because of the biases and the challenges that we had, many of the girls were told not to worry about college because they would only achieve motherhood. Hopefully be a wife, but motherhood for sure. So even though I took opportunity to go to UC Berkeley after graduating from high school, I quickly realized in that year that I was accruing debt with no real job prospects. Does that sound familiar? So I did not return the next academic year. I couldn't see how I could make that work for me in any way possible. And it was primarily due to some challenges I actually encountered at UC Berkeley as well. However, I still did want to do something more than just be an office worker, which was the vocational skill I actually graduated from Ravenswood with. So I had academic skills. My academics weren't bad, but one thing about Ravenswood, when I graduated, we were given a vocational skill. And I did go through the administrative assistant, what we would call administrative assistant training for typing and filing, and some people did dictation and stuff like that. But fortunately for me, from 1969 to 1978, I was a student and later started teaching literacy skills, which was reading and writing classes at Nairobi College here in EPA under the mentorship of Dr. Mary Hoover. Nairobi College was one of several independent schools that started up in the 70s. And it specifically started as an alternative to the College of San Mateo, CSM. Black students from our area were being challenged at the college, and the support program, the college readiness program, which was created to support them, came under fire because the students were becoming political. And so they decided to sort of defund the program and change it back to just a normal support program. And the students actually pushed the adults to start Nairobi College. Being a community college, Nairobi students were primarily Black adults who lived in East Palo Alto, Belle Haven, and the Bay Area. And over time, as the reputation grew, others came from other parts of the country and the world to join us because it became something like a movement. Most agreed that education was the essential way to gain our civil rights. So we didn't follow Martin Luther King. Okay. We chose to follow Malcolm X. And so that became the basis for which we were fighting or trying to achieve our civil rights, was through education. After leaving Nairobi, I moved on to Foothill College, which provided me with the opportunity to get into the tech field, and a few years later into teaching tech classes. I took advantage of all the professional development, education and training opportunities provided there. And Foothill is a wonderful place to work. Okay. It provided me with an in-depth look at teaching and learning. They had ongoing conversations about that. All of the faculty participated in it, and it was quite informative as an experience. Early on during my Nairobi experience, I recognized that my desire to make a better education more accessible to youth and adults in my communities had become really important to me. And I just wasn't sure what that would look like. Even though I was at Nairobi, I wasn't sure what that would be. So after Nairobi closed its doors, I was able to move on to Foothill. As a part-time instructor supporting workforce development programs, because getting into tech meant that I was in considered a vocational field. I was able to teach classes to a variety of segments of the population. That included the trades. I taught classes for apprentices and journeymen. I was able to do training with teachers, K-12 teachers through the KCI, and worked with youth in the summers by offering my department offered a summer employment program for youth in out of San Jose and Sunnyvale, who came and they took classes and worked at the college. And that was our way of working on the digital divide. I am now a big proponent of career technical education because through all of that experience, I found that this approach gives you more options in your educational goals and how you achieve it. By the time I was ready to semi-retire from Foothill, my focus had narrowed to looking for better ways to teach and stimulate learning using tech. My experiences using different teaching strategies and methods, using like labs and hands-on learning and things like that, demonstrated that providing exposure and experiences outside of the classroom help make better education happen. And the strategies I'd been working on brought together teaching and tech. So over the following 15 years that I worked in the community, I continued to experiment with different teaching and training strategies in the different tech jobs and community programs I worked with. One of the main things that I learned is that the best way to get people started with tech is to offer it in a fun and stressless way. Teach people to play with it first, and also consider through virtual reality technology, people can even gain exposure to life experiences and resources that they don't readily have available. And I don't see that happening as much as I would like, even though I was aware of virtual reality technology when I retired, but it's like showing people how to go on the tours of different places to experience a city or a town or a museum or something like that. And to me, that's a tool that could be used more in teaching. Now come full circle from my Nairobi days, street code provides the fertile ground for me to continue developing my ideas and strategies using a greater variety of educational technologies because it's coming fast and furious. In addition, the teaching about the tools and skills needed to be successful in tech, I also get a chance to show that learning to use tech tools can enhance a wider range of life experiences and job preparation in all industry sectors. Showing people how to do simple things like customize their use of technology using the accessibility tool and system settings, how to become a self-directed learner using online support tools, and how to combine several tools to solve problems and work on projects are part of the skills that are actually covered in the class that I teach called Tech Exposure. So through Street Code, I am able to continue to develop ways and try out strategies that will help not only the children, but the parents and the elders in the community who need to learn tech just as much as those who are looking for a job. So that's my presentation.
Reconstructed this time. Will there be another conflict, or will there seriously and genuinely be an effort now to tackle the political root causes of what makes them a huge?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juanita.
Sure.
So I'm gonna start by asking a few questions we received through the RSVP, and then I'll open it up for general questions again.
Okay.
So one question was, coming back from the pandemic, what do you think the #1 priority is for educators at schools within East Palo Alto? And how do you suggest you encourage families in East Palo Alto to get vaccinated?
Well, my perspective is that the most effective way is through the trusted messengers. In our communities, every group has their own trusted messengers. And usually if we're trying to push to get advocacy or activities going with the residents, that's usually the best way to approach any problem where we want to try to affect the community at large. We did have some struggles with the getting the test and the vaccines into our community. The issue of equity in terms of us being the most vulnerable, but still the last to get the vaccines is a serious problem. But there has been a push. The Ravenswood Health Clinic is the leading agency in East Palo Alto, and even for Belle Haven, because many of the residents of Belle Haven also use the Ravenswood Health Clinic in East Palo Alto. So yeah.
Awesome. And in what ways do you feel educators should be infusing this history into students' education? Are there benefits or drawbacks to infusing this history?
Well, it depends on who you talk to in terms of whether it's a drawback or not. As I mentioned, people on the West Side have issues with Black people trying to be self-determining in terms of our communities, and all of our groups, all communities of colors, have the things that they are working on for self-determination. So allowing our youth to explore their cultures is an important piece to that. Letting them do, sharing, looking at a topic through their lens, through their cultural lens, is helpful, because then they can, it sometimes inspires them to do more, that kind of thing. Also, something I always like to mention around DEI is that communities of color are focused around communities, not individuals. We do best when we're focused around ourselves as a collective group. So encouraging our youth to think about that, if that's what they're into, their community, their families, whatever that is, encouraging to think about things as it relates to who they are, and ask them, engage them in, as much as possible, or if you can do some research on it, maybe talk to the parents or something to find out what would inspire this particular student. And so giving them a voice is important, giving them a chance to voice things out. Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll open things up. You can send your questions in the chat or unmute yourself. I noticed we have one in the chat. I received one in the chat. So someone asked, what are your recommendations for nonprofit organizations hoping to serve the IPA community that's not paternalizing?
Okay, so my suggestion is, and again, this is around a lot of discussion around DEI, is to identify a nonprofit in East Palo Alto that shares a mission or has a mission that you can work with, and ask them how you can be of service to them. Okay, now that may mean just going to a meeting and sitting and watching and listening initially to see, what issues are they dealing with, what kind of resources are they looking for, that kind of thing, so that you can start to hear from them what it is they think they need. And then you can offer your service to them. Okay. If it's about tutoring, you might check to see if it's possible to engage the student around their culture, or what ways in which you might be able to help them look at math, something different, and that. Again, but talk to the parents about that. Find out maybe a little bit more about the child that you're working with, so that you can speak to the child, speak to them. And the other thing is, because I've done a lot of tutoring and mentoring at Menlo Atherton. And one of the things about my experience there was I was working in the classroom a lot with the teacher, providing support, doing tech. And I was there through the fall quarter. We had Christmas holiday. I came back in January, and the students were frankly surprised to see me. And they said, "Oh, you came back." And I said, "Well, yes, of course, I'm coming back." And they said, "No, lots of people don't come back." So one of the things about our community is that, how much staying power do you have? How much commitment do you have to working with the challenge, helping out with the challenges that the community has? And if you have any way to provide resources at all to the community, look to see who might be a good recipient of the resources that you have to provide.
Yeah, I think a big thing there is don't assume a need, look.
Right.
Another person asked, what advice would you give to Black, African-American, or American descendants of slavery who need support advocating for themselves in schools without obliging to the typically used deficit language?
Oh, good question. Okay, that falls into one of my big things about perspective. The main thing is to frame it from an asset point of view, okay? To look at yourself from the assets that you have. And I often talk about this from working with people around their resumes and things like that, that you always want to try to frame it from an asset level. So even if it's a challenge for you, you can frame it as an asset, because challenges, working through challenges, troubleshooting, problem solving, all of that is a good skill. And so you want to always frame it from, I have this skill, I have these characteristics, what would be a good place for me to consider, as opposed to, and even if you have challenges in your skills, in a skill level, like let's say reading or writing or something like that, to say, I have all of these ideas and usually it's more about structural support around reading and writing. So yeah, just frame yourself from an asset point of view. And if you need help with that, that could be something that I might be willing to support, if that's okay. Because that's something I like to do for the youth of the community, is mentor and give them a perspective of going forward. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Juanita.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're at time, so if anybody needs to sign off, feel free to leave. Thank you so much for coming. But if you have a few more minutes, Juanita, we can.
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. So yeah, if anybody else has questions, feel free to unmute yourself, send anything in the chat. Okay, somebody says, how would you like to see folks currently working in IPA look to the Nairobi Method and the legacy of the Nairobi schools to inform the work currently being done in the IPA community? And how might the changed demographics of IPA impact that?
Okay. In terms of the Nairobi Method, well, this is what I did with the Nairobi Method. So just to give you an example, because it would really have to be specific to you in terms of how you do this. Once I realized that the main issue for most people is jobs. And my thing is that I find that starting young people early with jobs, whether it's volunteer, helping out their teacher in the classroom, whatever that happens to be, gives them purpose. And that if you can create an environment where they're actually looking at something that they're going to either help you with, or they're going to you're going to train them on something and you want them to produce something with it, that kind of experience is helpful. So for example, my children, they all got a job when they turned 15 and a half. And it was because I believed that them getting some work experience as soon as possible while they were still in high school was going to make a difference in terms of them being in continuous employment or always looking for employment. And generally, I find that a lot of students, and we have many students in our community who have to work to help support their families. And so they're usually working alongside their parents in the evenings, over the summers and stuff like that. And they just have to do it. But even if they don't have to do it, it's good for them to get started on a work ethic, a job ethic, and to start looking at jobs as something that they can do. So even in terms of the experiences that you provide them, it doesn't hurt for them to have that framework. So for example, under career technical education, that education starts at elementary school through things like exposure, having people go to the schools and talk about their jobs and share out with the kids the kinds of experiences that they have in the workplace. Then there's the exploration of careers, where you can show them about the different industries, or maybe the industry that you're working in, and you're sharing out that kind of experience. Then there's the issue of preparation, where you might share with them some of the kinds of training and expectations for you on your job, things like that. And so where it's progressively building on the concept of what work is about, and then ultimately what a career could be by the time they get to high school. So that's a part of their education. In other words, they still have the academic, but they also have this as a piece of their education.
Great, thanks so much, Juanita.
Sure.
Someone asks if they can contact you after the session if they have more questions about what you shared today.
Yes, I'm usually always willing to share out. So you want me to put my email in the chat?
Yes.
Okay. Spell it right? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So just let me know. Oh, I sent it to one person. Okay. Oh. Here we go. Oh, I guess I'll have to type it again. Okay. Did that come through?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. Yes.
And she also said that the Nairobi Method book looks like it's out of print, and she asked if there was a digital version available. I looked, it doesn't look like there's an ebook at all, but I'm not sure if you know of any copies that are maybe at libraries or anything, Juanita.
Oh, okay. Actually, it's a document. And so I did find it, where I found it was on JSTOR, which is a library that hosts a lot of manuscripts and documents and stuff. So let's see, I can give you, let me go back here. I'll put the information in the chat. So if they want to look at it, they can. The the document actually talks about the day schools. And so this was included in that article. And since it was applied to both the day schools and the college, I was trying to find that information. So I did find it there.
Awesome. Is there any more questions anybody has for Juanita before we sign off?
Well, I would like to say thank you for this opportunity. It's actually one of the things I had on my bucket list was to share out information here at Stanford. One little fun fact, I was born at Stanford University Hospital in San Francisco. So I've been kind of tied to Stanford forever. So, yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for everything, Juanita. You have so much insight and wisdom on the history and such a great perspective through all of your experiences. So I appreciate you so much for having the time and the energy to speak for us today. And it seems like everybody else is also feeling really thankful for everything you were able to share today. So yeah, thank you again, everybody, for coming. Feel free to reach out to me or to Juanita directly if you have any questions or follow-up information. Yeah, thank you all so much for attending today, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you for letting me share. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Juanita.
Thank you, Emma. Okay.